Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of our Economic Impact Town Hall series. I'm Cameron Dale, the Executive Director of the Utah League of Cities and Towns. As usual, this is a joint town hall between the League of Cities and Towns and the Utah Association of Counties. So thank you to the city and county folks who are joining us on the call. Congressman McAdams, are you in the call yet? We know we have a staff on the call, so as we're waiting for Congressman McAdams to join us, let me give you a quick rundown of what we hope to accomplish over the next hour. First, we'll be having a conversation with Congressman McAdams to talk about the latest on federal advocacy. It has been a fast and furious few days on the federal front. There is considerable dialogue between the Speaker of the House, the Senate Majority Leader, the minority leaderships in both bodies, and the White House about what we'll call Stimulus 3.5. There's also discussion around Stimulus number 4, let alone the implementation of Stimulus Package number 3, otherwise known as the CARES Act. We wanted to give Congressman McAdams some time to talk about all of those existing and potential packages and what they will mean for local government, what they'll mean for small business, and what they'll mean for the general public. After Congressman McAdams speaks, we did collect some questions that I have shared with the Congressman's team in advance. We also will be watching the chat box, so if you have any questions, you can post them there. And we'll have conversation for the first third of the time with the Congressman. After that, the conversation will shift to Natalie Gochner and Phil Dean, and we'll have a conversation about the Utah Leads Together 2.0 plan about the economic reactivation here in the state of Utah. Across the country, you're seeing more and more states having the dialogue about what it will mean when we come out of the urgent phase and how we reactivate the economy while still ensuring public health. Local governments are in a unique position because local governments are both employers and facilitators of the overall economy and quality of life of our residents. So we'll have that conversation about the 2.0 plan that came out on Friday and what you as city and county leaders need to know. And then the third piece of the call will be Victoria Ashby and me from the league staff giving you a brief update on what is still to come in the legislative special session this week. The legislative special session is going for 10 days. They came into session last Thursday. They'll be back in session this coming Thursday and Friday. And we are still working on bills that will impact cities and counties. In fact, the primary bill that impacts cities and counties is still under consideration for this week, and we'll give you an update on the CARES Act and what you need to know there. With that being said, I believe I now see if my screen is not deceiving me, a bearded Congressman Ben McAdams. Is that my screen playing tricks on me, or are you trying to be like me?
I'm trying to mimic you. I'm not, I don't know that I'll ever get there, but this is the result of laying in a hospital bed for a week and not having the energy to shave, and then, you know, deciding to keep it for a few more weeks.
Well, I wish I had a similar story, but I'm glad I don't. So before we get started, Congressman, first of all, we are very pleased to see you upright, out of the hospital, and hopefully feeling better. Do you want to just give us a quick update on how you're feeling?
Sure, thanks, Cam. I'm actually feeling great. It hit me really hard, as many of you know. It started off kind of with mild symptoms, and I immediately isolated and was staying at home. Just what I thought was an abundance of caution turned out to be that I had the virus, and I'm glad that I was following the guidance of our public health officials and our political leaders to do exactly what I was doing. But started out pretty mild. I stayed at home. After a few days, it took a little bit of a turn for the worse. I felt it move into my lungs, and I felt like I had a belt wrapped around my chest, and I couldn't breathe and take half breaths. I wasn't awful, but I was pretty sick, and so I just stayed home and worked from home. And then after about a week, it entered a third phase that was really bad. And I just remember on a Friday night, I'd worked a long day and probably pushed myself a little bit too hard. I was laying down in bed, just crashed, and got up to walk across the room and couldn't make it across my bedroom without stopping and leaning on the dresser to catch my breath because I was just exhausted. And that's when I called my doctor, and he said that I should immediately go to the hospital. And I did. They monitor your blood oxygen saturation, and it should be around 100%. Mine was about 84. It was 84 then, and so they were pretty worried about me. Checked me in. I spent 8 days in the hospital, but here I am. I'm great. I'm negative, COVID-19 negative, and hopefully have a little bit of immunity, but feeling good. And I was going to say back to work. I don't know that I really ever stopped working, although in the depths of being in the hospital, it was all I could do to just maintain contact with my family and my chief of staff, Nicole. But back at it and working hard, and glad to be with you today.
Terrific. Well, Congressman, we are thrilled that you're feeling better, and thank you for carving out some time today. I prefaced the conversation with our members here saying that we would be discussing the 3 different stimulus packages, but particularly the third package, the CARES Act, that Congress has already enacted, as well as getting an update of the interim package, which could expand the PPP, known in political circles as Stimulus 3.5, as well as whatever dialogue you want to share with us around Stimulus 4. So I'm going to stop there, let you give us the presentation, and then I'll chime in with some questions as we go along. And we're grateful for your time, and we'll plan on 15 to 20 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you, Cam. And thank you, everyone, for your time today, for giving me a chance to join you. I want to thank you for all the work that you are doing on the front lines of this emergency. As a former local government official myself, I know you guys are where this pandemic is really being felt. First and foremost, you are the front lines of our cities. You are our cities and towns, but you are our communities, and you are interfacing with the people who are feeling this pandemic. You're also interfacing with people who are not affected by the pandemic, the people who don't know anybody who's been infected, who wonder why we've shut down the economy, are really frustrated, and I'm sure you're hearing that as well. And I share, I also see what's happened to local government revenues, as they've just really gone off a cliff. And I share your frustration and desire to both manage this pandemic responsibly, but also get people back to work, get our economy back up as quickly as possible, as quickly as is responsible, but as quickly as possible. But I want to thank you, our local governments, for the incredible work that you do. And your work and your leadership is critical now to how we move forward in this really difficult time. So I know the shoes you're standing in. I've watched with some interest the Salt Lake County budget and what Salt Lake County is facing. And I have to be honest, there are times that I wish I still had the title Mayor of Salt Lake County next to my name. And there are times I've been very grateful I didn't have that title next to my name. But thank you for those who have stepped forward and for the challenges that you're facing, both as first responders and but also the budgets and everything you need to do to continue to provide for your residents when budgets are in free fall. So as you are all aware, Congress has now passed 3 bills to respond to the coronavirus emergency. The CARES Act, as Cam mentioned, the third one, was the most substantial and set up many of the big programs that you've heard about. Probably the one that most people are talking about is the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, for small businesses. The expanded unemployment insurance for workers who lose their jobs, and a $150 billion fund to help states and local governments directly. That $150 billion in funding started to go out to qualifying states and locality last week, although, and I understand we may get into this later in the call, but that has, for direct government funding, has a cap for jurisdictions with a population of 500,000 or greater. And I think that only picks up 2 local governments in the state, Utah County and Salt Lake County. And so you should see some of this funding coming indirectly to you, but I know there's a desire to see it come directly as well. I've heard other things from our cities and towns, things that you like about this legislation, things that you don't like about it. I want you to know that I've sent a letter to the Treasury calling for as much flexibility as possible in the use of those funds. I know as a mayor, as a local government official, that sometimes these federal dollars come with constraints on how you can put them to use, to the extent that sometimes it's so hard to even use them that you may conclude that it's not worth it. So I've been calling on Treasury to, the legislation kind of creates a broad framework for where these dollars will go. And then, as happens at the state level, you'll see the executive branch, the administrative agencies fill in some of the details with that. And so I've encouraged them to interpret that as broadly as possible and give as much flexibility as possible to our local governments, because I know that the challenges that you're facing are going to differ from rural Utah to urban Utah to New York City to Chicago, that the needs across this country are so different. And so flexibility is key, I think, in that. In addition to that $150 billion fund, the CARES Act also provided support for a number of different programs that get funneled down to states and localities. For example, the CARES Act provided nearly $13 million to Utah already in additional CDBG funds. Some of you, our larger cities in particular, may see some of those CDBG funds that you administer and can direct in ways that will help needs in your communities. Moving forward, state and local funding continues to be at the forefront of our thoughts and an integral part of any economic response. As many of you are aware, Congress is currently negotiating an interim coronavirus response package. Cam references the 3.5 that many people are calling it, the third bill. Or CARES 1.5, it's also been called. It kind of gets confusing. That package is expected to provide additional funding for small business loan programs. The urgency, and where you hear this talked about the most, is from our small businesses who are saying the PPP program has run out of money. So you have a lot of small businesses who are struggling to get by and have applied for that funding, and the funding at the federal level has run out, and so their applications are on hold. So it seems that there's a broad consensus to replenish that fund with some additional money to help as a lifeline to some of our small businesses. It also is expected to provide some additional funding for hospitals and healthcare providers. I know it seems counterintuitive, but many of our hospitals, as we're talking about flattening the curve, preserving PP&E, preserving the ability of our hospitals to manage this crisis and not be overwhelmed by a surge. At the same time, our hospitals are also suffering because they have had to cancel elective procedures that aren't time sensitive. Think your knee surgeries, your hip replacements. And because of that, a lot of the revenue that they count on to pay employees to keep the lights on in the hospital has completely dried up. So we're hearing of hospitals across the country, especially some of our hospitals in rural areas that aren't even seeing the coronavirus treatments that we're seeing in some of the more urban areas dry up and on the verge of bankruptcy. So that's something that we're concerned about. There's also one of the things that's still being debated is additional funding for states and localities. That's been a priority for Democrats in Congress, but it's faced some resistance in the most recent interim package. And unfortunately, at this point, while nothing's been finalized, it does look like additional state and local funding probably won't make it into the interim package, but will continue to be a priority in a future package. So at the same time as I am working to help the small businesses in your community, I know that that money may not come directly to your to support your budgets, but that money, if we can help our businesses survive and then come back once we're able to do so and thrive, that will generate revenue that will come into your budget. So working to support our small businesses and to replenish that PPP fund is a success for our cities and towns, and an important piece that I hope we can get done. And it seems that they're moving towards an agreement this week. I've said I'll get on the next flight out if we can get a bill and pass it and get it done and get that funding into our communities. So, you know, we've got to be able to bounce back. Resiliency is going to be part of this national emergency and how quickly we can come back. And if we can have people with a job, businesses ready to just unlock the doors and open the doors as the economy phases back in, that's going to be key to really springing back and bringing us back to the prosperous days that we knew just a few short months ago. So I'll pause there, and Cam, you're watching the time, but I don't know if you have any questions and anything you'd like to do in the meantime. Looks like we're
perfect. Thank you, Congressman.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no, we still have plenty of time for you. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear on the different distinctions here, because they do matter and how they impact local government. Stimulus number 3, which was the CARES Act, has that $1.25 billion amount and that the state of Utah in special session last week authorized the ability to receive that money. We are still awaiting the Treasury Department guidance that has to arrive by April 24th. Congressman, thank you on behalf of cities, towns, and counties for sending a letter to the Treasury Department urging flexibility in that guidance. The League and UAC wrote a joint letter. Our officers sent that to Treasury a couple of weeks ago asking for the same type of flexibility. The focus of that $1.25 billion in the CARES Act stimulus part 3 really revolves around reimbursements for state and local governments for necessary expenditures that were unbudgeted related to COVID-19. Until we get the guidance from the Treasury Department, it's hard to create a formula or even know what those necessary expenditures will be. And we should know by the end of the week. In fact, I was overly optimistic when we scheduled this call that I'd be able to give you that update. I checked the Treasury Department's website right before the call started, still not there. Their deadline is Friday by law to have that out. With that being said, Congressman, you mentioned that the interim package, the 3.5 package, likely will not have any money for state and local governments because the focus will be on the PPP and on hospitals. What can you tell us, though, about conversations around the potential fourth stimulus? Congressman Neguse in Colorado has a bill open. There are other bills that are being floated right now. On a side note, Congressman Neguse was a law school classmate of mine back in the day, so tell him hi for me. Yep.
I will.
But what can you tell us about the fourth stimulus and where the conversation is and what it could mean for local governments, particularly around that 500,000 population threshold piece and the potential to replace lost revenue or at least supplement lost revenue rather than just the reimbursements?
So there is a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of momentum around lowering that from 500,000 down to even, I think Congressman Neguse's bill takes it to 50,000. I haven't, we haven't been in Washington in a few weeks, so I haven't had a chance to talk to him about that legislation, but it does seem to be getting some momentum. It is a question as to what, how much momentum does it make to get into the bill. But I do hear a lot of my colleagues who I'm talking to who are hearing from, as I am, from cities and towns across the country who realize how important that is going to be to get it to the bottom line of our cities and towns. I have heard some concern from some of my colleagues about, and I want to flag this for you in your conversations as you're advocating for this. It's not a concern that I necessarily share, but a concern that if Congress allows funding to go to state and local governments, does that just mean for things that aren't, that maybe would be to help ease some of the budget pains that you're feeling right now, does that reward fiscal irresponsibility from some of our large cities and our states around the country? I would be concerned about that too. I wouldn't want to see Utah taxpayers funding a bailout of a state government that just simply has made reckless and irresponsible decisions over the course of the last 20 years. So we should watch that. I think that is not a reason to say no. That is a reason to pay careful attention to how that language is drafted to ensure that those funds are distributed in a fair and equitable way. I got a warning that my battery's low, so I disappeared for a second. That's something to watch and to be careful about. But I'm hearing that concern as to why we shouldn't provide more state and local funding at the congressional level. I know, fiscal responsibility and balancing the budget is one of my top priorities. But I've heard this stimulus referred to as similar to the health crisis we're in. We have the economy right now on a ventilator. We got to keep the economy ready to spring back. And so it's a time where I think the measures we're taking, we will have to pay for them sooner or later. But right now we've got to keep the economy alive and ready to come back. So there are a lot of issues being discussed. Continue to educate members of Congress, to advocate for why that's important. And as a former local government official myself, I understand how difficult it is to balance a budget, especially when so much of your budget is reliant on sales tax. So let's do everything we can to get some funding to you, so that your services your government can't shut down. You can't have budget disagreements that stop you from plowing the snow off the roads or filling the potholes. So we understand and want to make sure that you have the revenues you need.
Perfect. Thank you, Congressman. And you mentioned sales tax. So one thing we've learned as we've talked to our cities, towns, and counties around the state is that people are going to see the budget crunch in sales tax, gas tax, utility revenue, and the like. The League actually has a survey out in the field where we're collecting data about the fiscal impact of COVID-19 on communities. I'll just share one example from the city of Helper. They actually rely heavily on their utility rates to literally keep the lights on, pun intended, but also to provide services in that community. And they're concerned that their local businesses are being hit very hard by closures because of COVID-19 and won't be able to pay their utility bills. And there's no guarantee that even if those businesses receive PPP dollars, that they'll still pay the utility bill. And so Helper is very concerned about being able to continue to provide services in the interim. That's a small community, full-time population of less than 3,000, but a very real issue for them. And we're hearing similar stories from cities around the state as well as counties. So once we're done analyzing those survey results, we will share them with you and your colleagues in the congressional delegation. I represent Utah on the National League of Cities Board of Directors, and the NLC is doing similar analysis around the country, so you'll be seeing that analysis as well. One question that came in on the chat box is around the PPP and oversight. That was a piece that was negotiated in Part 3, but still is part of the dialogue around 3.5, and that is the oversight around how the PPP and disaster loans are being spent and what sort of accountability there will be. And I welcome your answer both on the accountability for the PPP, but just accountability in general around these tax dollars, whether it's for the state and local fund or the PPP.
Well, let me just say, first and foremost, unequivocally, there will be accountability for how these dollars are spent. And I hope that this isn't a gotcha for a lot of our small businesses and local governments who are just doing the best to get by in a crisis. But sadly, we also know that there will be fraud and there will be abuse of these dollars, people who are looking to profit off of this crisis for their own personal gain or the gain of their business. And so I want people to know that we will be watching how these, who receives these dollars and what they do with these dollars, and that they follow what the parameters are given to them by the legislation and by the administrative agencies. And it's why I think it's important for the Treasury to build in some flexibility so you can make judgment calls that are good faith judgment calls. But for those businesses that are, may use them in ways that aren't appropriate or not consistent with legislation or administrative directive, there will be accountability. And so I was an early proponent of making sure that the CARES Act had an accountability and oversight directive. That is, the process for that is unclear at this point. There's some politics in there. I'm confident that we can find, it's more how we do it, not whether we do it. I think there's broad agreement, and I feel very strongly that these are precious tax dollars, and we need to make sure that they are spent in the way that that our elected bodies have asked them to be spent. We saw some headlines today about PPP being gobbled up by large nationwide franchises rather than supporting the small businesses. So those are, and I don't know that that's not inconsistent with how the legislation was written. It's probably inconsistent with the intent, the spirit of the funding. And so we want to look at that and maybe tightening it up, but also that we are watching closely for fraud and abuse in how these dollars are spent.
Perfect. Mayor Mann, I see you mentioned in the chat box about whether the state should determine how to allocate funding for local governments in the Coronavirus Relief Act, which is part of the CARES Act. I'll quickly reference that. We have been in discussions with legislative leadership and the governor's office, but we are waiting on the Treasury Department to give guidance about whether that money can be shared through the states with local governments. I'll share a quick conversation that we had with Senator Jerry Stevenson, who's the Executive Appropriations Chair in the State Senate. He said to us, once we hear from Treasury, that he welcomed the League and UAC bringing a formula and a proposal to him that he could then share with his colleagues, which is a different story than I'm hearing from my colleagues in state leagues around the country that don't have the same level of collaboration that we have here in Utah. So once we have that Treasury Department guidance, a lot of these other pieces will fall into place around the CARES Act. Congressman,
keep us
last
posted
question
on
for
that,
you.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to keep it posted. I think our legislature deserves a shout out. I've known we've worked across the table from them and on the same side of the table. I have across and on the same side of the table as them, and we do have a good collaborative legislature. It doesn't mean we always agree, but keep me posted on that, and hopefully we we can get to the same place, whether it flows through the state or flows directly to the cities. We can get to the same place.
Perfect. Well, Congressman, any final thoughts to the mayor's council members, county commissioners, and others that you have right now of what you want to hear from them and from the League and UAC in the days, weeks, and months to come?
The only thing I would add, please keep reaching out to us either through Cam and I talk on a regular basis, or you can reach out to me directly. But the thing that I would add is also I have taken most of my office and made them case managers. So if you're going to hear from the small businesses probably before they even think to call me. If you hear from that small business who has applied for a loan but can't figure out getting the runaround or getting voicemails from SBA or just not sure how to navigate it, please send them to me. We are eager to take their calls. We have staff who is fully dedicated to navigating any of these federal programs, whether it's the unemployment insurance, the PPP. Send them our way, and we look forward to working with them and helping to solve their problems.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your team for making time for us. Brandy Grace from UAC, thank you for joining the call. I know you had another commitment that you left early so you could join. Anything you want to say to a former county mayor turned congressman?
Just thank you. We appreciate your efforts on our behalf. And I apologize. I don't know what the update is now, but I'm sure that you're advocating for local government interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandy. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Perfect. Thank you, Congressman. Thanks for the time, and we will definitely be in touch. With that, we will now pivot and to talk about the Utah Leads Together 2.0 plan. We are thrilled today to be joined by two of the architects of the plan and two of the people who are involved in implementing it. I should mention before I introduce them that the legislature last week created a 10-person commission that is looking at the 2.0 plan in addition to the task force that the governor has set up. Brandy Grace from UAC is on that 10-person commission. The governor's task force includes Brandy and me, and then the two individuals who are about to speak are heavily involved in both groups. So with that, we have Phil Dean, who is the State Budget Director and Chief Economist for the state of Utah in the Office of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. And we have Natalie Gochner, who is the Director of the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute and Associate Dean of the David Eccles School of Business at the University of Utah. I've been in regular conversations, as has Brandy, with both of them, and Natalie in particular, as we're working on the 2.0 plan. One comment I made at the beginning of this call to just preface this pivot is that local governments are both employers as well as facilitators for the economy, public health, and quality of life. So the 2.0 plan impacts us in both ways. So with that, Phil and Natalie, I'll turn the time over to you. Phil, let's start with you to talk about the 2.0 plan and where we're at, and then Natalie, you can jump in from there.
All right, thanks, Cam. So Phil Dean with the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. And first of all, just talking about the plan, I want to highlight what a collaborative effort it is. It is interesting when I talk to my colleagues in other states, often they're amazed at how well people work here together. It's not that we always agree, but we can always sit down and talk and work through many of the issues. Just to give a little context for the Governor's Office of Management and Budget and our approach in this, that we're heading up the governor's response. We have an intelligence portal. If you look in the plan as an appendix, has some of the details that are available in the portal, and that's what's being used to guide decisions. As was mentioned, both Brandy and I just got off a phone call for the commission that was set up by the legislature, and that's part of what we did is walk through that intelligence portal, which is a dashboard showing the key indicators that we're looking at hospitalization, looking at the transmission rate, and also looking at economic indicators. We're building out that piece, personal protective equipment, things like that, that we're have a consolidated place that we're tracking all of that. The GOMB does staff that that commission, which met just barely, and going to keep meeting over the next several days in a row, and then certainly on an ongoing basis after that. The commission has a recommendation due to the governor by Wednesday, so that's very much on the fast track. So with that, maybe if I can introduce my colleague Natalie Gochner and have her walk through the plan. I very much want to thank Natalie for all that she did. It's quite the process to pull something like that together on the fly, and she handled it very adeptly. And I'd like to have her walk us through it if we can.
Thanks, Phil. Happy to do that. Cameron, will you give me the thumbs up that you're hearing me all right? Great. So again, I work at the University of Utah. I lead the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute. We do a lot to support, as a public university, the public interests of the state, and we're asked to help pull together this plan. I'm going to go ahead and pop it on screen here, and I'll try to walk through this. Cam, do you want me to do like the 3-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute?
You and Phil have 20 minutes, so you can.
I'll do.
You've got a captive audience of 190.
All right, I'll try and do this in about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we can have some questions if that sounds okay. I've just put up the cover of this. You can get the plan at coronavirus.utah.gov. I like to look under the business tab. I wanted to highlight that this is version 2. It builds upon version 1. Version 1 was released in March, and I expect there to be additional versions of this plan. You'll see right here on the front cover, it says it's a dynamic plan for a dynamic situation, and the measures and everything will be updated as required. If we go into the inside cover of the plan, I note this paragraph here where it says, this version of Utah Leads Together builds upon version 1 by recommending actions for Utahns to take, reaffirming the urgent stabilization and recovery economic phases, and introducing promising new data tools that will help Utah basically reactivate our economy. Message from the governor, I'll skip through that, but just get you to this page where we remind people, it's called Utah Leads Together because we all have a role. The governor has asked us to take 3 actions: follow public health guidelines, stay engaged with the economy, and assist those in need. And in version 1 of the plan, these 3 economic phases were introduced. We're currently in the urgent phase, but we're rapidly approaching the stabilization phase. In the stabilization phase, a lot of the things that have happened, whether it's the CARES Act or the Governor's Office of Economic Development bridge loans, or even all the adaptations and innovations happening in business, but we begin to stabilize and move towards recovery. We do provide some data on in the urgent phase, what we've seen in terms of hospital capacity, transmission rates, and COVID-19 cases. I'll pause here for just a minute on this page. We actually look at how unemployment insurance claims vary by county in the state as a % of the employed population. This data is now a little bit dated because we got new information, but just conceptually, as you think about the state, we have 3 counties, starting with Grand County, where Moab is, Garfield County, really centrally located near our national parks, and Summit County, where our ski industry has such a large role, have been the hardest hit counties when you measure it as unemployment insurance claims as a % of the employed population. So we do see a lot of variation. And then here are the various industries and how they look in terms of unemployment insurance or initial claims as a % of jobs. And you can see the leisure and hospitality sector. I'll make this just a little bigger, in the double digits there. And you can see other services being hit hard. And then you can kind of look through this overall. Another thing I'll say is that this right side of the screen that has these principles for adaptation, this is actually a really important part. It says that the Economic Recovery Task Force or Response Task Force thinks of the reactivation of the economy more at like a dial than a switch. And we want to just gradually turn up that brightener. So as we do that, the first thing to remember is this vigilance point, that this is not a one and done major economic shock, but rather a new risk that we have to live with. It's not only a public health and economic crisis, but a crisis of confidence. And that's really the linkage between health and the economy, because if people aren't confident that they're safe, they will not go to work, they will not engage in the economy, or if they do and you lift the measures too early, you can backtrack on the progress that's been made. So that requires some patience. And then there's just a whole bunch of innovation that's been brought to bear in our state, and I'll kind of highlight those as we work through here. We do give a federal and state update and highlight local government involvement. Both the League and UAC helped us here. I will highlight, and this came from GOMB, but I think these numbers are really important. The PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, we're estimating that that's bringing $3.1 billion to the state of Utah in cash assistance, and that the direct aid to workers and families is in the neighborhood of $2.5 to $2.8 billion. These are incredibly significant numbers that are in play, and I do believe the consensus is, as we just heard, that there will be more to come. Phil, do you want to say anything more on those 2 points? Those are really coming from your office. Yeah,
just the 2 points. One, that we think there will be additional funding, that we're very optimistic about that. The other piece, our latest estimate, we think we're pushing more toward $3.7 billion to the state of Utah. Wow. under the PPP.
The PPP. Okay, very good. So, you know, we highlight some of the things that local governments are doing to make a difference. And then we have a little section on how to support local businesses and employees. And I know that this seal of approval gets a lot of attention. This would come through the governor's office, the legislature, and the commission. But the idea that there may be some sort of not new regulation, but rather a seal of approval for employers that are adopting practices that are safe and can help reopen the economy. We do provide, and I'll make this smaller just to get you the concept, but we do provide a whole page on how to access federal resources, another page that summarizes the small business loans. And then we get to the heart of version 2, which is this reactivation of the Utah economy, and introduce these color-coded health guidance system, high risk, moderate risk, low risk, and a new normal green. This is the dial that would be turned up. And it's really important as we introduce this tool to remember these things on the far right here. These are rules of conduct that the economic response team has recommended and the governor has adopted, that we must use common sense and take personal responsibility as we begin to reactivate the economy, that we have to make hygiene and cleaning a big part of it, that we have to follow the guidance or risk backtracking. So let's say you start turning that dial and people don't maintain their spacing and we go back to a world of hurt. And then a real important point, that the high risk populations require a different set of instructions. I'll stay on this page for just a minute here and try to explain it. But as you remember, version 1 of the Utah Leads Together plan had 3 economic phases: urgent, stabilization, and recovery. These are viewed as statewide for our statewide economy, include a timeline. And you note this timeline goes for about 2 years because we don't know the course of this virus, and we're just trying to be looking around a corner and understanding uncertainty. It is a consensus that we are approaching the stabilization phase. As we do that, within each of these phases, the state is looking towards putting in place this color-coded health guidance. And it's really important that you don't view the stabilization phase as all orange or all yellow, because as we go through the next, let's say, 6 months to 2 years, we could have places in the state that are orange, places in the state that are yellow, and places in the state that are green, all while we're in the stabilization of the recovery phase. So this diagram is just giving hypothetical examples of this commission that will make will be advisory to the governor and make recommendations of when we should be orange, yellow, and green, and that could be applied statewide on a regional basis, and there could be many different ways to think of regions. You could provide it on a county basis, and you could even provide it on a community basis. Let's say we saw a hot spot or flare up this November in Salt Lake County. Salt Lake County might change the way it conducts itself based on the governor's guidance. Cameron, did I do an okay job explaining that? That's a complicated one, Brandy and Cam.
You did a great job, and really I'm hoping everybody takes a deep breath here, because this is critical to everything we're discussing. We have applauded the governor over the last few weeks for not taking a one-size-fits-all approach, which has been unique compared to the rest of the country. And that's one of the principles that you saw at the beginning in the 2.0 document. But I think it's important for people to see the calendar and see these hypothetical examples of how the guidelines on public health could vary from place to place. Brandy, is there anything you want to add about this particular information?
Yeah, just clarifying the importance of this and being able to make decisions based on actual data. I think this is where it's really helpful, and then still, having that based on data, be able to make decisions regionally, within a county or even smaller populations within a county, I think is very important, so that we're not adversely affecting the economy unnecessarily.
That's great. I know when someone
and
else
Natalie, to that end,
to
that end, one question that both UAC staff and league staff have received repeatedly, and we'll be asking the Lieutenant Governor on our weekly call with him tomorrow as well, is around strategies for mass gatherings. Mass gatherings will be the last to come back within this new normal. But when I look at this calendar, I see May, June, July, August, September. And normally those months are filled with city and county festivals, with 4th of July festivities, and other predominantly outdoor events. The document itself, in the sections that UAC and league staff helped write, focused on doing those events when public health guidelines authorize them, and there's a sense of public health and safety involved. Do you or Phil have any feedback for folks right now who are in the process of planning those events for this summer, or is it still too early to tell?
Phil, I'll let you go first if you'd like, and I have a couple of thoughts I'd love to share.
I mean, my sense is it's too early to tell. There's a lot we're still learning. We're still processing a lot of this. We do have data that we're tracking that helps us understand what's going on. I wish I had a better answer than that, but my thought is that it needs to be data driven. We need to understand where we're at from a public health standpoint, and then make those decisions based on that. And maybe Natalie is going to be getting to this in the next pages of the plan. Just want to also highlight as we look at that there are additional more detailed guidelines that are available together with this plan at coronavirus.utah.gov. That's one of the questions a lot of people have is, this is, even in this plan, it's still pretty high level. There's additional detail, and that's part of what this commission is looking at as well.
That's great. I'll just add on that point, Cam, that I'm in agreement with Phil. I think we need to go 2 to 4 more weeks and see what the data is telling us. There's going to be a lot of new data coming out. I do feel confident that if there are mass gatherings, so to speak, in the mid to late summer or fall, that masks, face coverings, and spacing will be part of it. And as you said, this will be the last part of our sort of new normal to come back. Real quickly, I'll finish up here. I'm going backwards. I realize it's hard when someone else controls the document, but I did want to show you, we did show these principles for the full reactivation of the Utah economy. And there's number 3 is respect for geographic differences, recognizing that regions, counties, communities face different circumstances. And then 4 here was the take extra precautions with high-risk populations. So I neglected to point that out. Last thing I'll show, other than to just highlight the plan, what else is in here, is this page right here is an example of the type of guidance that's given by industry. I realize that's really small. I just want you to get it conceptually, where we list general guidelines by different level of risk: restaurants, retail, hotel, events, personal services, and so on. And this is the type of specific guidance that is delineated in much more detail online, what Phil mentioned. So just the last thing, there's some specific instructions for high-risk populations. You see that here. There's a description of the new measures and tools that are coming out, the operational measures that GOMB is using to help inform this new commission. The state will begin large-scale representative field testing this week, where we actually get below the iceberg and look at not just people who are showing symptoms, but what does the general population show on a random basis, so we know what's going on. And then in the appendix, I just want to highlight that there's a decision matrix, so you can go look at that. There's an example of the intelligence portal, so you can look at what GOMB's developed. There's a summary of the fiscal and economic measures in our state, the summary of the monetary and fiscal response. There's a map of population percent of total 65 and older. And I wanted to highlight this because the 65 and older is looking to be the most high risk part of the population, and it varies dramatically around the state. So I'm highlighting that here. The number of small businesses in our state, employers by employment size. So we have a lot of small businesses. General guidance for employers. And then we have a really nice page for local government involvement for each of the phases. This was prepared by the Utah Association of Counties and the Utah League of Cities and Towns. With that, Cameron, I'll turn it back to you and Phil.
Can I just add one piece there, Cameron?
Be my guest.
Want to talk a little bit about the best real-time economic data that we have right now is the unemployment insurance claims. Over time, we'll have additional data that comes in, but that's real-time data that's reported on a weekly basis. So that's our best real-time indicator. We're the last public data, we're at about 100,000. We're seeing moderation take place in those unemployment claims, but still rising rapidly, right? Still at a high rate compared to any historic norm. The good thing in that is that in ballpark terms, about 70% of those are still attached to an employer, meaning they're on furlough, but it's anticipated that as we begin to reactivate the economy, that those employees will be able to transition back into jobs, as opposed to the other 30% who we consider to have lost their job. So to me, that's good news that again is in the next several weeks as we're looking with new protocols, but looking to reactivate the economy in different ways, that there are going to be a lot of opportunities. And in fact, in a phone call this morning, John Pierpont highlighted we still have 23,000 open jobs through the Department of Workforce Services job listings. So even though there's absolutely been a lot of economic disruption that's taken place, I also have a lot of hope out there as we begin to relax some of the restrictions with turning this dial, that I have a lot of hope to moving back. Not that it's going to take place overnight, but we're not seeing necessarily, so far at least, some of the impacts at the same level as other states.
Thank you, Phil and Natalie. And there's a lot to unwind here. And so let's ask a few follow-up questions, both that came in via email and that have appeared on the chat box. Phil, you talked about the unemployment data that we heard this morning on the call. Brandy and I were both on that call too. That's the regular economic response task force meeting that the governor hosts every week. And you mentioned that 70% of people are still currently tied to their jobs. So ideally, bringing this back to what Congressman McAdams was talking about earlier on the call, if we can infuse more money into the PPP from the federal level, that money should make it to employers who then in turn can keep people when we're able to reactivate the economy, and you are able to reactivate those 70% fairly quickly. correct? Is that an
Yes.
easy way to summarize how those pieces all come together?
Yes.
So with that being said, we are still in the urgent phase. And this 2.0 document gives a lot of information about what will happen when we go to the stabilization phase. And we both at the League and at UAC receive questions, what, Brandy, hourly, by the minute, asking about the timing of going from urgent to stabilization. It does appear like Utah's ahead of schedule from where we thought we would be in the middle of March. We are still in the urgent phase. Will you just help talk through the timing and the decision-making process as we move from red to orange, and what people should be looking for from state leaders on that process?
So I'll start, and then Brandy, if you want to add anything in terms of the commission is making recommendations to the governor by Wednesday, so that's 2 days from today. The governor has essentially till the end of the month to make to either accept those recommendations or to articulate why he doesn't think those are the right recommendations and move a different direction. So I don't want to presuppose what the commission may recommend, but I think there may be some pieces that may start earlier, but I expect within a couple of weeks is what's being looked at.
I'd like to add there, and I'm going to just put this on screen that y'all can look at again, but in the document, it does show the measures and tools that are part of the GUMB dashboard, and it has the critical questions that they're looking at, both for the virus and for social and economic. And then it even shows the key measures in the repository. Again, these are operational measures that you can act on. So the proxy for the growth rate, hospital utilization, monitoring and detection data, exposure source, economic performance, and social indicators. So that gives you a sense of the intelligence that the commission and the governor will have.
And if I could just key off that again, Natalie, in talking about one of the important pieces that's coming online this week is this widespread testing, right? So not just for sick people, but to really figure out how many people have it out there in society or have had it in the past. Using the iceberg analogy, there are a lot of people that have the virus that never get sick from the virus, or at least not noticeably sick enough that they need to go in to the hospital, right? So that's one of the questions that we don't currently know the answer to, but this week we're beginning the process to better understand that. How prevalent is this virus in society? Has it spread about what we think? Is it less than what we think? So that we can get that below the water level information that we don't currently have.
Bill, and I'll just add there, this is being done at the University of Utah, and what you'll see is about 12,500 people randomly selected and tested at 25 locations around the state, so that we get a representative sample that tells us a lot of intelligence. Who has it? Who has antibodies? Who doesn't have it? What are their characteristics, whether it be age, race, ethnicity, location? And then this becomes a critical part of managing the orange, yellow, green moving forward.
Terrific. And that's also where the Test Utah website will be a major asset. People can go to Test Utah and sign up there for an assessment and testing, correct?
That's right. That's why this diagram shows the things that are sort of above the water line and the things that are below. And the combination gives us really powerful intelligence tools that allow us to be more targeted in how we manage COVID-19, because we think it's a new risk we have to manage. And if we manage it, we'll be able to take public health measures that aren't so blunt as shutting down the whole economy.
Perfect. Well, thank you both. Brandy, any final comments on this piece before we get to the special session update?
No, just I'm I'm going to take the opportunity to emphasize again the importance of messaging, which I've brought up, I think, on every call that we have. We certainly want to make sure that we're getting the information from this working group to our local leaders so that they're able to help share the messaging in their communities. So Natalie, Phil, anything that you could do along those lines, just keep in mind the importance of local elected officials and how they can help in making sure that this message is shared statewide.
Will do. Thank you so much. So great to
Perfect.
see the interest in the plan.
Perfect. Phil and Natalie, thank you very much for your work. Thanks for joining us here. And there is right now capacity for testing in Utah. So let's make sure we're sharing that with our constituents to go get tested and to go to testutah.com for those assessments. 2.0 is available on coronavirus.utah.gov. Was a major focus of the legislative special session that started Thursday and goes through this Friday. I'm going to turn it over to Victoria Ashby, the Director of Government Relations at the League. Really, the League and UAC have had unparalleled cooperation over the last few weeks as we've tackled this from both an education side and an advocacy side. So, Randy, thanks to your team for the collaboration. Victoria, do you want to give us a quick update on where things are right now leading into this upcoming Thursday session? Victoria, we cannot hear you.
I think my phone's muted. So
Yep,
I'll use my
we can hear you now.
Okay. All right, how is that now? Great. Okay, so as many of you know, the legislature met last Thursday and Friday on special session, and it's been kind of a wild ride. If you've been watching legislators fumble around with their Zoom meetings, they like a lot of us are on their first Zoom meetings, and so it's interesting to watch the session go that way. But they are planning on meeting this Thursday and Friday as well, and that will be the end of this first special session that they have called themselves into. We're hearing that they will probably have more special sessions during the spring, possibly replacing interim committee meetings with those special sessions. During this special session, they've had 16 bills and 4 resolutions. Some of those bills are still making their way as one chamber meets in the morning and the other chamber meets in the afternoon. And we'll see how those bills wrap up. There is a possibility that there could be new bills introduced. They could do that as long as it falls in line with their call. My guess is they won't do too much of that because it's so difficult to try and wrangle these bills as quickly as they are without committee meetings. Just a few highlights. SB 3006, COVID-19 financial relief funding. That bill had some provisions directing DWS to help with residential housing rental relief. And then it also directed GOED to help with commercial rental assistance. HB 3004 was an annexation bill. It has not moved, and we're hearing that it probably will not move this session. So hopefully that will kind of be put aside for now. HGAR 301 is a resolution urging fiscal responsibility. So it's basically urging local government and state government to stay fiscally responsible as we all see how the economic fallout happens during this time. Let me see if I can switch back to my phone because I think my audio is better on that.
Perfect. As you switch over, we've got about 2 more minutes, and let's give folks the update on where 3009 may be going this week.
Okay. Can you hear me? Is that good?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, the big 2 bills left are SB 3004. That passed. It created a commission that's going to put the plan together. And if the governor adopts that plan, anything that plan contrary to local ordinance or order is preempted by the plan in order to create this statewide formula for recovery. And then HB 3009 is local government emergency response. This bill, 2 big parts of this bill is it changed local health department authority so they could not issue orders, and a city or county mayor would issue that order. And then it also created in a statewide emergency situation. It's in a statewide emergency situation. It allows the governor to preempt a local order that is contrary to a statewide effort if the local order is in conflict with it. This bill has received a lot of pushback from the right. There's a lot of concern that it was taking away civil liberties, that it was giving mayors authority that honestly they already have, but it was creating new authority. And so the sponsors are trying to work around some of those issues. They're also meeting with leadership probably tomorrow to decide how to continue on with this bill, whether it's the same bill, if it's modified a little bit, which we are expecting a draft to come out to hopefully clarify some of these political hangups, or if the bill is broken up into pieces to preserve some of the things that we asked for. For example, the ability to do electronic meetings in emergencies, to change grandma for emergencies, and some other provisions like that. So that's the update in 6 minutes.
Perfect. Yeah, that's what feels like 600 hours of work over the last week in 6 minutes. Brandy, any final comments from you about the special session this week or anything else?
Nope, nothing in addition. Obviously, we're watching very closely. So we know in the House Bill 3009, there were a lot of critical pieces for governments, including the Open Meetings Act, or the timing for developing minutes, grandma issues, funding issues, and so we're certainly making sure that those pieces are taken care of as well.
Perfect. The one thing I'll add here before we go is that this bill originally started as trying to eliminate the ability of local governments to have emergency power, and we were successful over the last couple of weeks with tremendous advocacy by UAC and the League and the Association of Local Health Districts to, at least in last week's version of the bill, still preserve that local authority, just shift the decision-making process from the health department public officer to the elected official at the city or county level. As Victoria stated, there was a lot of confusion about the bill. It blew up online last week. A lot of moving parts. The bill was changing by the hour. So stay tuned. We'll be sending action alerts and other information over the next few days if this bill gets heard again, to make sure you know what's in it. And that really at its core, our objective was to preserve the local authority of cities and counties to make important decisions during emergencies. So with that being said, Brandy, any final comments?
Just thank you to the League and staff for coordinating the calls and including us. We really appreciate the partnership and the collaboration that we've had through this entire process.
Terrific. Well, the feeling is mutual. Tomorrow we'll have the call at 4 o'clock with the Lieutenant Governor. The legislature will be in special session on Thursday. We will do another economic impact call at 3 o'clock next Monday, and we will be sending our daily email with additional relevant information tonight and in the other days to come. With that, thank you everyone for your involvement in the League of Cities and Towns and the Association of Counties. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Sam.